What is up, my world history people? Welcome to online world history class week 2. All right, so this week I hope we're gonna keep chugging along, but I hope everybody's starting to get a hang of Plato, is starting to understand it, and is not too stressed out about it. If you're stressed out, let me know. We can, talk about any questions you might have, comments or concerns. I'm here to help you. Also, there's the high school administration is also here to help you. All right. So the Cold War heats up. That's our lesson for the week. Last week, we kind of talked about the start of the Cold War. So this shouldn't be the rise of communist governments last week. This just goes hand in hand with that. It's going to talk about key events and the start of and the events within the Cold War within Europe. We're not going to get to any of the major like events like the Cuban Missile Crisis or the Berlin Wall or stuff like that. We're not going to get to that yet, but we're going to start. We're going to work our ways there. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully it works. Before it hasn't really worked very well. So let me share this here. Boom. Let me move that to the bottom. Move this over. Okay. Cold War heats up. Here we go. So this is a nice little breakdown or table of contents, which is over in the top left-hand corner. Don't forget about this left-hand side toolbar. At the top, you have the table of contents. You've got like a note function, dictionary, read aloud, translation, and lastly, a highlight function. Take advantage of that. It can help you work out any questions you might have. So nice little intro video. I recommend you work on a nice little warm-up activity. Right, talking about seeing if you can match the leaders with the countries we talked about last week. All right, so this timeline's great. It has so many key Cold War events. I don't know why there aren't any more on there, but of the key beginning events that we're going to talk about throughout the entire lesson today. I truly think the Berlin Blockade and airlift was really the start of the Cold War, of hostilities flaring up between the United States and the Soviet Union. So basically, in this, the Soviet Union blocked the city of Berlin off from, because Berlin was split into West Berlin and East Berlin. West Berlin was controlled by the Allies, the United States, France, England, and then East Berlin was controlled by the Soviet Union. So the East Berlin was communist, West Berlin was democratic. So West Berlin is where you want it to be. But the communists blocked off all entry points for West Berlin, which was an issue because they could not get resources. People were starving. So the United States military had to airlift and drop in supplies, which most of you probably have heard about, to that struggling to West Berlin, to the people of West Berlin. Fun fact, my grandfather actually participated in the Berlin airlift in 1948, which was kind of cool. Some of you might have had family members that also participated in that. So United Nations, we talked about the United Nations last week in last week's video. It's kind of a beefed up League of Nations. We know the League of Nations because a lack of military, a lack of, they could just ask countries not to trade with the country that was doing things poorly. The United States wasn't a member. It was slow to act. All those reasons it failed. The League of Nations failed. The United Nations sought to learn from that, improve upon it, and create an organization that actually worked, which for the most part, the United Nations has done a pretty good job. The picture on slide 9 is from the United Nations headquarters in New York City, currently shut down because of COVID-19, but that's what it looks like on a nice sunny day when you can walk around there. So after World War II, the UN was created in 1945. Right? And the biggest success was that it negotiated peace on several occasions, but perhaps its greatest victory was preventing the Cold War from escalating into a nuclear apocalypse, basically. That was its most important moment or purpose. So the ultimate purpose of the UN goes beyond maintaining world peace, but it has several purposes, from maintaining global security, fostering respect for human rights, achieving international cooperation, all that good stuff. Working together to solve issues in a peaceful way. That's the gist of the UN. So the UN, it has two bodies, the General Assembly and the Security Council. The General Assembly is the central policy-making group of the UN. They're the central big meeting every year. So this is a picture of the General Assembly. They meet once a year, and there's delegates or representatives from all 193 nations in the world come to New York City for this. And they discuss big things like budget and international issues and how they can solve issues in a good way. The National Security Council, on slide 12, is a part of the UN that meets multiple times a year. Their job is it's made up of 15 nations. There's 15 permanent member nations that always have a spot on this council. Obviously it's the US, Britain, France, Russia, and China, the big countries within the world. Other members, so that's what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 10 other nations are voted upon and can be added to the council and taken off the council as the permanent members wish. So their job is to organize peacekeeping missions, authorize military actions, and impose sanctions on other nations. They do that a lot between Africa, Mexico, where else? Mainly Africa and Mexico and South America, and I guess Iran. They impose sanctions and authorize peacekeeping missions, right? Use the UN's, United Nations troops, to keep the peace. They're not there to win a war, they're there to keep the peace. That's why they use their military. So peacekeeping efforts right here. I had a professor in college, very smart guy, had a lot of degrees from Yale and Cambridge in England and the London School of Economics. Very smart guy, but he did his focus was on peacekeeping and international relations. He studied in parts of Africa like Kenya and South Sudan, the efforts by the UN to promote peace and keep the peace in these countries, and how oftentimes it achieves a negative peace, or a peace that doesn't last, a peace that is just absence of violence. It doesn't really solve the issues. All right, on to the next slide. A instance, or a very notable instance of the UN peacekeeping troops working is in 1946 during the Greek Civil War. Basically, guerrilla forces, or small military armed civilian forces led by the Greek Communist Party, were trying to take over Greece, the government of Greece. UN stepped in, shut that down. Funding from the United States also helped shut that down. But that was a key victory for the UN to stop the spread of communism, especially in a country that didn't want it, such as Greece. So this activity, based on your experience as a student, how do you think teachers and instructional materials address the goals stated in Article 26, Section 2? For example, what subjects and books address this goal? So read this objective here, right, at that link, and answer this question, please. Not very difficult. You need to read Article 26, Section 2. Don't read the whole thing if you don't want to read the whole thing. You can. I recommend it. Read that section, though. All right, Cold War in Europe. So that was an overall look at the UN and the Cold War. The start of the Cold War, let's talk about the Cold War in Europe. Europa. So Joseph Stalin on the, I believe your screen's the left-hand side of your screen. Harry Truman right here. So after World War II, these two were stuck butting heads. right? Berlin airlift between these two individuals. The United States supported free democratic Europe. However, the Soviets wanted to take control of as many countries as they could. So they took annexing or taking control of a number of independent states, such as Poland. This right here, as you look at several states that were taken over by the Soviet Union. Not good, not cool, really, really, really damaged Eastern Europe, really until this day. Eastern Europe is a, we'll talk about later. They're struggling because of actions taken during this time. These states that were taken over by the Soviet Union and turned communist against their will were called satellite states because they were out away from the Soviet Union, such as East Germany. East Germany is separated by Poland from the Soviet Union. However, Poland and Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, they were all controlled by the Soviet Union against their will. So they had to follow all the rules. The secret police, military, the Soviets used those two things to keep order, right? You couldn't talk bad about the government or you would disappear. There were no free elections. The Russian dictator was your leader. Citizens had no freedom to relocate or migrate. You couldn't leave the country. You were stuck where you were. I had another. Poland was a huge hotbed of trouble during communist rule, really from 1950 up until the 1991 and the fall of the Soviet Union. But I had another professor that went to Poland, studied the issues that happened in Poland after World War II, and taught me a lot about that subject. It's pretty interesting, but I'm not going to get into that here. It's video would be too long. So that all those satellite states and the Soviet Union were known together as the Communist Bloc, or a bloc of countries that were communist, led by, at the beginning, Joseph Stalin, opposed by Churchill of England, Truman, and Eisenhower and Kennedy, and really Ford and Nixon and Carter and Reagan, and ultimately Bush of America, Khrushchev and Gorbachev of Soviet Union as well. All right, the Marshall Plan, very, very important. So 1947, U.S. diplomat George Kennan came up with the idea of containment. Basically, the United States' goal should be to stop the spread of communism anywhere. So that's why we got into the Vietnam War. That's why we got into really conflict in the Middle East. Right? So that was our main goal. So part of the Truman Doctrine, or as it became known as the Truman Doctrine, containment, was he wanted to offer economic aid to all Western nations in Europe. Right? These nations were struggling with rebuilding after World War II. Many of them were in ruins. Their cities were bombed out. They were really struggling and they needed help. So giving money also helped Greece stop their civil war and stop communism, containment. The success of the Truman Doctrine led to the introduction of the Marshall Plan, which I talked about on the previous slide, giving money to countries that needed it. $12 billion in financial aid and resources to all European nations, including those in the communist bloc, if they wanted to accept it. However, Stalin and the Soviet Union, Russia, declined and prevented satellite states from accepting any economic aid. So, under the Truman Doctrine, we wanted to stop the spread of communism. One way to do that was to give money to European countries, to make them like the United States. So under the Marshall Plan, the United States gave economic aid and resources, $12 billion worth of it, to all European countries if they wanted it. Joseph Stalin of Russia, the Soviet Union, declined it for Russia and all of the satellite states like Poland and Czechoslovakia. Marshall Plan turned out to be a huge economic success, both for European countries that accepted it and also the United States. Our economy boomed. The 50s, that was the best time in America, many people believe. However, Eastern European countries and Russia to this day are struggling with the fact that Stalin declined those payments, that money. Really set them behind Western Europe and America because their economy was really struggling after the war. Russia and that part of the world lost millions of people during World War II. They needed help badly. They really did need help. And Stalin prevented that help. And today, many parts of Eastern Europe are impoverished and underdeveloped because they've never had the chance to develop again after World War II. Another question? Tired. Making these lessons takes it out of me. All right, so we're on slide 26 now. This is just basically talking about a Cold War within Germany. All right. What happened after World War II within Germany? You know, you couldn't have Nazi symbols. Former Nazi officials were basically prevented from any positions of power, as they should have been. And the Nuremberg trials were going on, trying those war criminals. So Germany was not only divided in two, Eastern and Western, but it was also really struggling with, you know, the fact that they orchestrated the Holocaust and the whole war. All right, so you got West Germany and East Germany. So Germany as a whole was split into two. West Germany was controlled by the Allies in World War II. You got England, France, America. East Germany was controlled by the Soviet Union. Right? So split into two, Germany was. Berlin, excuse me. Berlin was also split into two between West Germany and East Germany. That's why when I talked about the Berlin airlift, Soviet Union was able to block off West Berlin. So that was basically only going to create conflict if two sides control the same territory, essentially. Not a good idea. So the Berlin Blockade, partition of Berlin, all right, so basically the Soviets blocked off the Allied section of they had troops all around blocking all entry points into the Allied part, or West Berlin. So as we talked about earlier, the Berlin airlift sent in those needed resources for the people of West Berlin. Who knows, my grandfather could have been on this flight. I don't know. But as you can see, people were gathering to get those supplies. So this question here, please take this seriously and answer it. Because of the way the Berlin Blockade ended, one could argue that the first struggle in the Cold War was won by the West, right? We won the Berlin Blockade. We got Stalin to step back. What would be a reason to make this statement? Maybe I just gave it to you. All right, for this activity. So you're going to look at one of Winston Churchill's speeches. So in this activity, you will read and analyze British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's perspective of the Cold War. Churchill was one of the most inspirational speakers of his time. Read his famous 1946 speech here, if you click on this link, in which he describes the growing power of the Soviet Union, and also watch at least part of the video that accompanies the speech to get a sense of Churchill's speaking style. He was a fiery orator. Then answer the questions below, okay? So you got a question there. What do you think Churchill meant when he said in his speech that an iron curtain had fallen across Europe? An iron curtain. What did he mean by that? So military alliances now. So now that we've got East versus West and Democratic versus communist, we're picking sides here. So now it's time to make some alliances. So NATO was the first alliance. This was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The blue countries, so you have Canada, America, you have, Greece, Italy, Spain, all of Europe except for, obviously, Soviet-held Russia and other parts, Soviet possessions in Eastern Europe, signed on to this. So this basically was a security pact. Basically, if someone attacked if Russia attacked the United States, all of our allies like Italy and Spain would have our back and would fight back against Soviet Russia. So it was basically, I have my back. No, I have my back. I have your back if you have my back. So a mutual defense pact. However, Soviet Union was not going to miss out on this, So they made the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact had all of the Soviet Union, obviously, and all of their satellite countries. Right? Albania, Bulgaria, Romania, all of those countries, against their will, basically, were members of the Warsaw Pact. Basically, because of NATO, Stalin and the Soviet Union didn't want to miss out on anything. Or not Stalin, because Stalin was dead by that time. But you get my point. All right, so the Cold War really starts to intensify after we have the Berlin airlift and everything. But once it starts to explode, no pun intended, when the Soviet Union developed the atomic bomb. For not a long time, but for a couple years, America was the only country that had the atomic bomb. We had that power over everybody in the world. So we could basically do whatever we wanted because we had an atomic bomb and you didn't. That all changed, though, when Russia developed the atomic bomb. Now there were two big powers in the game, Russia versus the United States. Right? And this characterizes the rest of the Cold War. The arms race, building nuclear weapons, seeing who can become the most powerful, the most ruthless on a global scale. That was the Cold War that we're going to learn about in the next chapters. All right, so you're going to have a summary video like always, and your star, congratulations for finishing it. Let me end my screen share here. All right, so I know I kind of went through that pretty quick, but I can't make super long videos here on YouTube. Please email me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. That is my job. I'm here to answer your questions and make sure that you reach your highest potential and do your best. That's about it. Everybody have a great week. Try your best. Get your work done. And hopefully if you watch my mindset video, find your goal that you want to accomplish during our Corona break, our COVID-19 break, whatever you want to call this virus, and make sure that you end this break on a positive note and exit it better than how you entered the break. All right. So have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions, people.